Imam Muhsin Hendricks, a South African so-called progressive imam, has been killed in cold blood as he was traveling to officiate a marriage. What does this tell us? That even moderate Muslims aren't safe, not even in secular countries like South Africa. And this threat of violent extremism just never goes away. In this video, I'm going to discuss who was Imam Hendricks and how does someone even end up as a progressive imam? What does this say about Islam and the possibility of reform? Would something like this happen in another religion? Let's get into it. So what happened? As Imam Hendricks was sitting in a car, a truck stopped in front and blocked them from driving off. Two unknown suspects with covered faces got out of the vehicle and started firing multiple shots at the vehicle. Thereafter, they fled the scene and the driver noticed that Hendricks, who was seated at the back of the vehicle, was shot and killed. He was visiting to officiate the marriages of two interfaith heterosexual couples when he was tragically shot and killed. Traditional imams rarely, if ever, perform the marriage of a Muslim to a non-Muslim, something that Hendricks had no issue with. To quote ex-Muslims of North America, while no motive is officially confirmed, it beggars belief that his status as an important symbol of transgression against Islamic sexual mores while occupying a position of authority played no role. This is a saddening but easily predictable consequence of dissent, particularly in the realm of sex and gender roles, in a religion that encourages its violent punishment. It is true that any plain reading of Islamic scripture renders the religion's inherent homophobia undeniable. But it is also true that reducing the injustices committed against LGBT+ individuals in the name of faith requires voices like his just as much as those of militant opposition. However naive his project to reconcile a homophobic belief system with pluralism and tolerance, his refusal to surrender to hateful dogma in life was courageous and praiseworthy. It may be that he has achieved martyrdom in a decidedly different sense than his own religion defines it." End quote. Even in a secular country, extremists have their way. You just can't seem to get away from these people. People like me, who exist online and continue to critique the ideology, are never truly safe. We always have to take precautions. He was the subject of a documentary in which he said about the threats he faced, the need to be authentic was greater than the fear to die. He knew that there was a risk in being an LGBT imam. He did this to create a space for those who were like him, struggling to find a place for themselves in between Islam and their sexuality. He told the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans and Intersex Association World Conference, that's a mouthful, in Cape Town last year, it's important that we stop looking at religion as the enemy. Turns out religion was the enemy, his enemy. This unholy alliance, queers for Palestine and whatnot, is never going to turn out well for the queers. The paradox of tolerance comes to mind. It's a philosophical concept suggesting that if a society extends tolerance to those who are intolerant, it risks enabling the eventual dominance of intolerance, thereby undermining the very principle of tolerance. What did the Muslim organizations say? South Africa's Muslim Judicial Council, MJC, one of the country's main religious bodies, condemned the killing. As members of a democratic, pluralistic society, the MJC remains steadfast in advocating for peaceful coexistence and mutual respect even amidst divergent views, it said. Kudos to them for saying this. Another leading Muslim body, the United Ulama Council of South Africa, condemned extrajudicial killings and urged people not to jump to conclusions about the motive. As I covered in previous videos, a lot of these organizations and Muslims, they care more about the fact that he was killed extrajudiciously, meaning without a trial, because in an Islamic state, he would have been killed. So technically, under Islamic law, there's nothing wrong with him being killed. So they always focus on the fact that it was vigilantes, right? I guess the extremists among them didn't agree. Deputy Justice Minister Andreas Nel of South Africa told the Newsroom TV channel that it's too early to say whether this was a hate crime. Find this ridiculous. What could the motive be? Maybe this was an armed robbery. Maybe he wasn't the target and they got the wrong person. Misplaced gang violence? Stray bullet? Obviously not. He was shot execution style. What sort of anger does it take and hatred for someone to kill someone in cold blood like this? What kind of hateful ideology do you need to belong to snuff out a man's life because he believes and supports gay marriages? It's clear, 100% clear to everyone who knows that this was Islamic-style assassination done to destroy what he stood for, tolerance and plurality in the community. To make it worse, social media is full of nasty comments by Muslims. Senior lecturer in Islamic studies at South Africa's University of Western Cape, Dr. Fatima Assop, reflected on the distressing vitriolic content circulating on social media in the wake of Hendricks' killing. She said, "I just find that completely shocking and so far removed from an Islamic tradition, which is all about compassion and mercy and preservation of human life," she told the BBC. Dr. Assop is deluded to think Islam is about compassion and mercy. She added that while she understood some of the strong feelings against Hendricks' work, there was absolutely no justification, Islamic or otherwise, for this kind of violence. So she does understand the vitriol and hatred against him and where it comes from. Then why the mock outrage and shock then? Yasmin Muhammad had a short video on Instagram that I want to play because it highlights some of the comments Muslims have been posting, and she said it well.
I've heard the news of a gay imam in South Africa. His name is Muhsin Hendricks. He was just ambushed in his car and murdered. He was killed for being an openly gay imam. And to add devastation upon this tragedy, take a look at some of the comments that Muslims have been posting all over social media. They don't even have any shame. There's all sorts of messages from people that are supporting this death and that are reclaiming the fact over and over and over again that you cannot be a Muslim and gay at the same time. Other people are saying that it's good that he was killed. People are saying that he deserved it because he was doing this openly haram thing, saying things like, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, Muslims don't play. They're proud of themselves. They are not angered, they are not sad, they are not humiliated, they are not ashamed that their ummah go around murdering innocent people who are just minding their own business. No, they're supportive of it and they are encouraging of it. This is incredibly disheartening, incredibly sad, and incredibly devastating, not only for the LGBT community in South Africa, but all throughout the rest of Africa. People, gay Muslims in Nigeria and throughout, are mourning the death of this imam. People think that they are going to stop the world from criticizing Islam through doing these acts of violence, when in fact, these acts of violence are only encouraging people to look at the violent edicts of Islam even further and to be further disgusted by the actions of Muslims and by the voices of Muslims throughout social media that celebrate death.
Very well said by Yasmin. These comments are awful. The Muslim community has a long way to go. You have widespread hatred for people like him, even while you have other people in the community who will simply tolerate him. A South African Muslim YouTuber by the name of Yassin Ali uploaded a video 2 months ago and said he was shocked at what Hendricks was doing, but that we shouldn't attack him physically.
We cannot agree with you and your interpretation of Islam, and we're going to say, look, this is not of us. This is your own interpretation. This is what you want to do. This is what you want to promote. From our side, we can respect you as a human being. We don't need to harm you. We don't need to attack you physically, but we have to be outspoken about what our beliefs are, because it's going to conflict and it's going to confuse people. And
I want to play a video about Imam Hendricks from a year ago because it explains him quite well. I'm going to add my thoughts as well. Before I play the video, a reminder to please subscribe if you like this content, as I frequently upload on the topic of clash of worldviews between Islam and human rights. Even better, hit the bell notification to be the first one to get updates.
In Cape Town, South Africa, Imam Muhsin Hendricks has a message that's not widely heard among his fellow Muslims or among his fellow Africans either.
I think God is not homophobic. We are.
Hendricks is one of the world's first openly queer Muslim prayer leaders. As head of the Al Khuraba Foundation, he's made it his mission to help other LGBTQ+ Muslims reconcile their faith with their sexual orientation.
I remember when I came out at the age of 29, there were no structures in place, support structures for queer Muslims, and I felt it was a very lonely experience. Whatever good befalls you, it is from Allah.
In person and through an active presence on social media and the web, Hendricks offers marginalized Muslims spiritual support and counseling. He also provides training and educational services to promote what he calls an Islam that is inclusive and compassion-centered. It's a controversial message. Within mainstream Islam, homosexuality is commonly condemned as sinful. In some predominantly Muslim countries, homosexual activity is a crime, punishable by severe prison sentences or even death. Similar attitudes are widespread across much of Africa.
In the beginning of my activism, a lot of the time, probably almost once a week, I would get a message in my box about somebody wanting to run away from their country.
In South Africa, the 1996 post-apartheid constitution explicitly banned discrimination based on sexual orientation. In 2006, South Africa became the first country on the African continent to legalize same-sex marriage, and it remains the only African nation to do so. But attitudes at the grassroots aren't always as liberal, especially among many South African Muslims.
I grew up in a very orthodox, conservative Muslim home. My grandfather was the Imam of the mosque. The struggle between my sexual identity, which is intrinsic to me, and my Islamic identity, which is also something that I would not give up because it's so important for me, was quite a big struggle.
Hendricks says the struggle started when he was around 5, and it became deeper during his adolescence.
You often hear your grandfather talking about, how gay people are going to go to hell, and then you think, well, I think I'm one of them, and how can my grandfather speak of a very compassionate God, and at the same time a God that condemns me for something that I didn't choose? So around the age of 16, I sort of just drowned myself in religion for fear that I might go to hell.
He was a good man. He wanted to create a support system for marginalized Muslims like himself. Then he explained how he had no choice in being gay. Did you hear that? That's a sign that he was struggling with the fact that he was gay. He explains his fear of going to hell and how he drowned himself even more in Islam. This is one coping strategy for those who end up in cognitive dissonance. When things aren't clicking, which way do you go? Either you go up and out, or further down the rabbit hole. That brings me to a question of why even call yourself a progressive Muslim? Why not just leave it completely when it's so incongruent with your lifestyle? In my opinion, this has to do with childhood indoctrination. Being raised as a Muslim, being taught that Allah is real, it's hard to undo for many people, and even when clear contradictions appear, they can't seem to face the music. I personally know several gay ex-Muslims that they were twice as insistent that Islam is true, than straight Muslims, because they felt that they were looking for an excuse to leave Islam so that they could not feel guilty about being gay. This is a real struggle. He admitted that he feared hell. This is something that's very hard to get rid of. Again, I spoke to many ex-Muslims now, gay or not, who rationally are convinced Islam is false. But this nagging fear of hell doesn't go away for a long time.
The conflict ramped up even more when he began Islamic studies at a university in Pakistan.
So the messages that I was getting was, that I need to change, and I need to, if I want to become an imam, I have to follow the sunnah, what we call the sunnah of the Prophet, the practice of the Prophet, and his practice was marriage.
So Hendricks got married and had 3 children, but he says he realized he wasn't being authentic about his sexuality. After 6 years, he and his wife decided to divorce. Hendricks moved to a farm where he says he fasted and prayed about his situation.
One of my conversations with God is, I'm going to not stop fasting until you tell me what it is that you want from me. What am I supposed to do with my life? And it ended up I fasted about 80 days. And close towards the 80th day, I felt very comfortable with my relationship with God, comfortable with my understanding of Islam, and comfortable with who I am as a queer person. Then I said, well, I'm coming out.
I've spoken to gay ex-Muslims who also went through the exact same thing. One of them was married to a woman for many years, and he actually told me he felt sad that he put her through this because he couldn't face the truth that he was gay. He got married, got divorced, thankfully didn't have kids, and then realized that he wasn't being true to himself and ultimately left Islam as well. Imam Hendricks also got divorced, and then after 80 days of fasting decided he was going to come out as a gay man. On the hero's journey, this is what you would call death and rebirth. And following this was his transformation. He transformed into a sort of leader of the community. What he really should have done was to ditch Islam completely. As a gay man who doesn't associate with Islam, nothing would have happened to him. But even now, he was not hurting anybody. He was doing his own little thing in his mosque with 5 people or whatever. Yet he was seen as big enough of a threat that he had to be exterminated. I don't believe that Islam is impossible to reform, but it is resistant. And there's a long way to go before it gets to the point where this will become acceptable. I'd give it a decade more. I think it's time for progressive Muslims to realize the jig is up. It's time to stop pretending that you can fit these tolerant views in Islam. You can say whatever you want, but there will always be a mark on your back, at least within the Muslim community. Islam has always been changing, even if Muslims refuse to admit it. But the community doesn't want you, so why do you want to call yourself Muslim?
He told his story to the media and included a hotline number. He was surprised by the response.
I had about 150 calls, and 80% of those calls were all positive. People thanking me for being brave to do this. Here and there were a few abuses that were hurled at me. But by then I was like, I signed up for this.
Hendricks has since produced videos to help others.
The biggest fear for queer Muslims is being rejected by family and friends.
And there's an animated story about a queer Muslim whose mother has trouble accepting that he's gay. It's based on Hendricks' own experience. He says it took his mother 10 years to come to terms with his sexuality.
I will take some time.
Then I don't care what the world thinks about me now. You know, I have my mother behind me.
Hendricks argues for new interpretations of long-standing Islamic condemnations of homosexuality.
Because there's no prophetic tradition around homosexuality, and there's also the Quran is silent about sexual orientation.
He believes stories in the Quran denouncing same-sex encounters are really about something else.
It was either about molestation on the highways, or it was about coercive sex. And I'm like, what is the story got to do with me? Or with anybody who is just innately attracted to the same sex with no choice of their own. I think it's got a lot to do with the culture more than what Islam really says about homosexuality.
Hendricks broadcasts his ideas widely online and through social media. He's inspired Muslims around the world, and he has generated fierce controversy.
Often people ask me, you're doing such a dangerous, controversial thing, have you had no death threats? None whatsoever. And I think it's because of my approach to the work. I always say that I'm not confrontational, I'm care-frontational.
Well, clearly the biggest fear for queer Muslims is not what their family is going to think. It's about them being basically killed for being gay. I mean, that's the worst thing. He was probably speaking about this from the context of living in South Africa, where he probably felt safe, right? You know, to be a progressive, you'd most likely also have to be a Quranist, not accepting any hadith at all. And then Even the famous story of Lot, you'd have to reinterpret that to be about rape and not about homosexuality like he just did. But then again, when has following religion been a rational thing? It's something that these people feel is right. Usually from childhood they've been Muslim, so this is why they're Muslim. So they find ways to twist the text to make them conform to their beliefs. I think him and many other gay Muslims feel a sense of self-loathing about their sexuality and struggle to reconcile why God would make them gay and also condemn their gayness. Many gay ex-Muslims I know were married at one point, as I mentioned before, including Hendricks, eventually getting divorced when it didn't work out. It's all part of the self-loathing, forcing yourself to go through this, that you hate yourself so much that you can't accept this integral part of you.
Hendricks says his faith gives him the strength to do his work.
I think I would have not survived this if I didn't have a strong faith. And I thank my parents for that. And knowing that God is always there for you. And there were so many experiences in my life that proved that for me.
He's also encouraged by the marginalized Muslims he supports.
It makes me purposeful. It recharges my batteries, knowing that I'm being instrumental in people's lives. I know that my story has given a lot of hope to queer Muslims, and I hope it will continue to do that.
He also hopes his story may help lead to a new vision for the faith he loves.
And that people can actually get to a point of practicing Islam as a compassion-centered faith and as an all-inclusive faith, and a faith that is a vehicle for our spirituality.
He says he'll keep working to see that happen. I'm Kim Lawton in Cape Town.
I don't think he was being completely honest about the lack of death threats here. Or maybe he just wanted to think that the world was better than it really is. Maybe he felt safe in South Africa. But nobody's safe anywhere. As Sam Harris said, we all live in Israel now. It's just that most of us haven't realized it yet. By that, I'm guessing what he meant is we live in civilized countries where the threat of violent extremism is always lurking. He clearly was being threatened before this happened. He knew there was risks involved in doing this. And sadly, he lost his life now. I wonder what he would think if he was still alive, knowing that he was killed for this. Would he still support a peaceful Islam? I think he probably would. How do we honor his memory? By speaking about him and to not forget what he died for, the right to love and to be yourself. And let's also not forget that this is yet another example of how awful traditional mainstream Islam is. It has violent tendencies, and it's a dangerous ideology that we all need to know about. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider joining my Patreon. You can also join me on YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thank you to my patrons for your continued love and support. You're the best. This is your friendly ex-Muslim Abdullah Samir, signing out.